Chapter 4. The Strength That Endures. Fastillion remained unobserved as he watched what transpired in accelerated time. The three Norsemen were each strong in body and determination. They soon recovered enough strength to feed themselves and implement their hardy appetites. Once the men were out of immediate danger, the only person they came into contact with was a single watchful one-man who routinely came in to check on their welfare. He provided their sustenance and emptied the chamber pots. The Norsemen slowly recovered their full health and then their natural strength as towering men of the north. A week passed in only moments as Fastillion watched them finally recover sufficiently to get up and freely move about the room on their own. Bjorn and his two cousins were incapable of learning the indecipherable language of the small man who acted as the agent of their hostesses. The diminutive attendant was not nearly so linguistically incompetent as those he cared for, even though his local language did not possess all the same syllables as the Norse tongue. He listened intently to the three Norsemen when they held their conversations, then rapidly assimilated his patient's ramblings to accumulate a rudimentary understanding of their communications. The man identified himself with the name Zabu and then made it clear that they were to remain in their room to rest and recover until such time as Zabu's mistress Kitsan summoned them forth to have a meeting with Hanats, the village's high priestess. The Norsemen healed much faster than they chose to let on. When Zabu came in the room, they would feign greater illness than was the actual truth. They had a window in their room through which they could observe the daily activities of the Watchful One clan and their portion of the village. The Norsemen spent most of their time studying their captors during the long, dreary period of their confinement. Their observations revealed that the clan's hard-working men were never armed and always remained docile to the point of lowering their eyes from those of their female overlords. They labored together in peaceful cooperation as the communal property of their affectionate but domineering women. The men prepared all the food with a great deal of maize grinding. They tended the numerous gardens, fed the fish, and also the ducks. They cared for the children, performed numerous artistic crafts that supported daily living and generally maintained the comfort of their village. Even those women with infants had their men bring them their baby when the child required breastfeeding, and then their man would take the child away again afterward. On occasion, the specific intimate relationships between the men and women revealed themselves to the watchful Norsemen. Each of the huntresses had a man of her preference, and the partnerships were generally stable and long-term. The women allowed their dutiful mates to directly meet their gaze when they spoke in public. Other loving gestures were few but unmistakable in the otherwise unaffectionate atmosphere. The one obvious exception to the clan's interpersonal stability was when the women would occasionally engage in non-lethal fights to determine which of them possessed the rights to a desirable man. The women were militant and aggressive by nature, with no equivalent to marriage. When they fought over a man, the loser in the combative challenge also lost dominion over their former or prospective mate. Since the huntresses were continuously fighting, wrestling, and training, it was difficult for the Norsemen even to know just when their combats were supposed to mean something. During one of the regular afternoon weapon practices, the Norsemen watched from their window as a small group of blood panther huntresses entered the Watchful One's living area. The interloping women strode arrogantly over the interior bridge. The warrioress leading them carried a colourful target shield and a padded war club. On her face was a harsh expression that promised impending conflict. The armed woman headed straight over to confront Kitsan, who was busy leading her warrioresses in their militant exercises. A curt discussion ensued that involved the challenging woman making several assertive gestures toward Zabu and evidently declaring a formal challenge for ownership of the small man. Kitsan accepted, then armed herself with her own small shield and a wooden club that was similar to her opponent's war equipment. Sufficient padding covered their ornate bludgeons so that they were adequately safe for a ceremonial combat. Their fight was to take place in an informal fashion in the terraced garden just outside the window of the Norseman's room. The other women gathered around the terrace's perimeter to watch in respectful silence. The Blood Panther warrioress had a ferocity that was commensurate to her namesake. She made high-pitched howls and toothsome snarls as she leapt after Kitsan with a flurry of slashes from her club. Kitsan answered with a prolonged defensive display where she deflected attacks with her shield and club until her opponent began to slow from exhaustion. When she did finally lash out in return, Kitsan's swing was inaccurate and unorthodox. The Blood Panther woman bent low at the waist to evade the clumsy attack, only to have Kitzan's knee unexpectedly and explosively catch her under the jaw to lay her low. The victorious Watchful One chiefess already stood over her fallen foe, ready to strike with her club by the time the Blood Panther warrioress regained her senses. The defeated woman promptly surrendered and conceded defeat rather than have Kitzan club her into unconsciousness to prove the situation beyond any possible debate. The three Norsemen were speechless with amazement after they watched how fiercely the women settled their personal issues. The duel not only demonstrated that the women were expertly deadly combatants, it also proved that only the women had permanent clan affiliations. The men could not only change mistresses within a household, they could even change clans if a lost challenge dictated it should be so. Bjorn and his two cousins often deliberated at length on their circumstances. The Norsemen remembered having their longboat shatter in the hurricane and their days of drifting helplessly on the open sea. It didn't surprise them that they had washed aground on some distant shore. They needed to find their way home again, but had no means of determining in what direction they should go beyond the obvious bearing of north. The tropical land of dense jungle where they found themselves was completely unfamiliar to them. The village's towering central ziggurat was clearly visible from their window, and it seemed to them to be the perfect place to go and be able to see all the surrounding territory from a lofty vantage. Several weeks passed before the time came when they could no longer disguise their improved states of health. It was then that the three Norsemen decided that it was time for them to take some sort of assertive action. Bjorn volunteered to be the one who would leave the security of their chamber, then make his way to the top of the ziggurat so that he could search about in an effort to determine just where they were. It was their hope that he might see some distant harbour where they could steal a boat and then sail home. At the very least, they wanted to know in what direction they could find the ocean. Bjorn had no trouble leaving their room, since only a curtain sealed their doorway, and no guards waited outside to restrict his movements. The only guards he worried about were the ones they had observed for days from the room's window. The Watchful One clan maintained a team of 12 huntresses who continuously guarded their score of young children. The faithful guardians changed daily, but they always included one woman from each of the village's 12 clan houses. The unrelated huntresses cooperated faithfully and were totally dedicated to their job in that they avoided any distractions. Each of the selected warrioresses who guarded children wore a headdress of brilliant red and yellow tail feathers that made them stand out from all others. The only other regular guards were those that watched the bridge that led out of the village. There were also numerous dogs that didn't bother anyone from the community. Bjorn hoped that they would not make a fuss over his departure. He had seen enough of the men as they undertook their daily affairs to have some sense of how to imitate them. Bjorn felt that so long as he kept his eyes lowered and minded his own business, that he could walk about the village unmolested. He realized that he was physically unlike them in nearly every way, but he figured that the women might assume that Kitzan had finally given permission for him to go out. He also assumed that the worst the women would do to him if they did catch him was to take him back to his chamber after a harmless chastisement. The ventilating breeze that moved through the passageways of the clan house led Bjorn outside of the bewilderingly expansive manor. The sophistication of the architecture impressed him as he prowled down broad corridors. Bjorn found the structure especially impressive considering the comparatively primitive society that inhabited it. He chose a time when most of the Watchful One warrioresses were either away hunting or seated at a large pavilion where they ate their midday meal. Once he was outside, Bjorn had no trouble moving about as he pleased. Some of the clan's men saw him, but none of them made any effort to interfere with his exploration. Bjorn made his way out of Watchful One's district, walked over one of the interior bridges, and then moved into an adjacent clan's living space. The sector he entered was of no particular interest to Bjorn, as he was only interested in crossing through it on his way to the ziggurat in the center of the village. His necessary direction of travel took him toward a group of the occupant clan's women. They all carried either a padded club or a blunt spear as they practiced military techniques together in a spacious yard. One of the women saw Bjorn wandering in her direction, and she promptly became agitated by his uninvited presence. The other women noticed the distraction, and soon they all abandoned their practicing to see what Bjorn was trying to do. Bjorn kept his head down and tried to make his way around, but the training instructor moved to intercept him. She made him stop by using a harsh shout, and then she gestured unmistakably for him to turn around and go back the way he came. Bjorn ignored her clear warning, gestured toward the ziggurat as his intended destination, and then made an effort to go around her. All the other women fell into a stunned silence, except for the one who already confronted him. She was one of the chieftesses who wore the lip-plug of authority. Speaking again with even more fervor, she told him to turn around and go away. He ignored her growing hostility and tried to passively step on past. The woman immediately stopped him by reaching out to slap him with a stinging blow across the face. Bjorn would have killed any man for the offense. His rage was not as inflamed by the affront coming from a woman. The huntress was almost as tall as Bjorn, though not nearly as powerfully framed. Bjorn compromised by slapping her back and doing it hard enough to make it clear that he wasn't accustomed to taking orders from mere women. He was still not at full strength after his long ordeal at sea, which still couldn't account for the way that the woman hardly flinched from the slap. The hostile chieftess responded to his unexpected attack by slamming the butt of her spear into his stomach. She doubled him over with the force of her blow, then before Bjorn could recover, she drove her knee into his jaw to lay him out on the ground on his back. As Bjorn struggled to shake the fog from his head, the pugnacious woman started kicking him amidst a storm of unintelligible curses. Fortunately for Bjorn, Zabu had witnessed his departure from Watchful One Manor, then immediately went off to inform his mistress about what happened. It was only the sudden appearance of Kitsan that prevented the enraged chieftess from killing Bjorn with her sustained pummeling. Kitsan knocked the woman to the ground by ramming her with a running blow from her shoulder. An argument then ensued that quickly escalated until a host of women from both clans were prepared to brawl over the matter. The chieftess who first attacked Bjorn brought the issue to an end by sending Kitsan off with nothing more than a warning. "Keep your pets under control," she complained. "The next time he comes here, I'll crack his skull open." Kitsan had her warrioresses pick up Bjorn, then carry him back to his room. The Watchful One chieftess complained at Bjorn at length, demanding that he stay in his room and away from the women of the other clans. Zabu translated her words for Bjorn, who wasn't in any condition to make a meaningful reply. The women eventually dumped Bjorn back in his room, then departed to return to their own affairs. Zabu remained behind, and he was sympathetic over Bjorn's new injuries, such that he did his best to tend them. Several days passed before Bjorn felt strong enough to move about again. His lumps and bruises were still prevalent, but such injuries were insufficient to restrain his desire for freedom. Despite Zabu's daily vehement insistence that the three men stay inside their room, the Norsemen refused the advice and fabricated strategies with other intentions. Late one night when they were alone, the three men conspired a plan. "They're fattening us up for sacrificing," one of the Norsemen whispered to his two fellow clansmen. "If we don't get out of here while we can, they'll be cutting our hearts out on top of that monstrous mountain they've built out there. I heard that's what they do down here in the south." The second cousin asked, "What of their gold? We can't just leave here empty-handed." "Don't be fools," Bjorn scolded them in a harsh whisper. "It will be enough if we can find some weapons and enough food to sustain us, not to mention a boat of some sort. They may only be women, but they're big, well-armed, and mean as rattlesnakes. It will be enough for us to escape this place with our lives. Even after we get out safely, we must still figure out some way of getting back home. How much gold would you carry on your back if all they had was laying piled in this very room?" The men were in agreement that they should leave while they had the chance and be satisfied even to survive. Bjorn peered out into the hallway beyond the curtain to be certain no one was about, and then the three of them slunk away from their chamber. They found no guards patrolling within the manor, and all the residents were in their sleeping chambers along with their men. Some of their weapons were in racks that lined the walls in places. After the Norsemen had collected several obsidian-tipped spears and some flint knives, they exited by the same route Bjorn had used on his first excursion. Only a small sliver of the moon was dark. The lunar light combined with that of the stars was enough to provide suitable illumination for them to move about otherwise unaided. Watchful One Manor was within ready sight of the bridge out of the village. Though the community was quiet, a multi-clan team of 12 armed women guarded the bridge with great vigilance. The eldest of Bjorn's two cousins had a plan that would allow them to get over the bridge. "Let's start a fire," he advised. "Just a small one. The guardians will flee from their post to fight the flames, and while they're distracted, we'll make our escape." The younger cousin took up a small lantern that rested on a pedestal near the railing of a nearby portico. Using the flame, he set fire to a pile of dry woven baskets beside a wall. The fire spread quickly until its smoke and illumination alerted the guardians at the bridge to the rapidly growing threat to their community. The village's buildings consisted principally of stone without thatch to cover their roofs. A wind could still potentially spread the embers and do much damage. As the Norsemen had planned, all the women save one abandoned their post at the bridge to rush off and extinguish the growing fire. The Norsemen kept hidden until the female warriors passed by, and then they slipped from cover to run straight for the bridge. As they approached the single remaining guardian, she shouted at them, "You mustn't leave the village!" She screamed and waved her spear at them with dangerous hostility for them to go back. "We're in the middle of an emergency. Return to your room immediately, before I have you whipped for your flagrant disobedience." The huntress wasted her words since the men understood none of them and just kept advancing. A medium-sized dog of yellowish-orange hue accompanied the guardian. The animal barked savagely at the approaching Norsemen, and the sound of it served as an alarm to others in the village. Zabu rushed out from Kitsan's clan manor, then ran after the fleeing Norsemen. "Don't be fools!" Zabu cried to them in Norse. "If you cross the bridge, you won't live 100 paces." Bjorn led the way onto the bridge. After he struck the dog aside with the haft of his spear, he attacked the lone guardian huntress. She was a skilled Blood Panther fighter, but no match for the fierce Norseman who thought that he fought for his life. The huntress deliberately tried to avoid inflicting a lethal wound on him by striking at Bjorn's head with the blunt end of her spear. Bjorn returned the favor by knocking her weapon aside with a skillful parry and then hammering her in the jaw with his fist. His telling blow dropped her groggily onto her back for long enough to allow the three men to dash past to apparent safety. They leaped the open gap in the bridge and then sprinted off into the darkness. Zabu bravely chased after his fleeing charges. He also leaped the gap as he ran away from the safety of his home community. "If you trust no one," he cried, "trust me, you must come back. It's not safe to go out after dark. For the three of you, it isn't even safe in the daytime." "Go home, little man," Bjorn called back to him. "We're done with your prison, however lovely the jailers may be." The Norsemen ran straight for the cliff without knowing where they were going. They followed the river as common sense decreed to be a good direction. Soon enough, the high precipice confronted them with its imposing waterfall. As the three men gazed about in search of a trail leading down, Zabu caught up with them. "Please," the little man pleaded, "come back with me while we still live. The jungle is a place of great danger, even for the strongest of women." A nearby coppice of thick jungle growth exploded as a monstrous semblance of a man sprang forth, then rushed their group. The huge, hideous figure had the appearance of a living corpse with putrid flesh that rot had blackened and swollen. Swarms of squirming maggots crawled over the rancid meat of his body, with many more worms making the flesh quiver as they crawled about beneath the rancorous skin. A fetid stench wafted from the creature, and it was so foul as to make the men near to retching. "Now you see," Zabu wailed in terror. "It's maggot feast. We're doomed." The Norsemen brought their spears up to fight. Never before had they seen such a supernatural creature, and no explanation they could conceive of made any sense to them, except that the thing was some sort of god or demon. They had no clue or reason to suspect that what they saw before them wasn't real to its appearance. When they had previously been in the presence of the Moksei, they were too delirious to take account of what had happened around them. For all they knew, they were actually facing some sort of undead monstrosity born of a dark underworld. Even when confronted by such a malevolent force, they were still prepared to fight. The three Norsemen formed up into a front so that they could array their spears in a tight formation. The Moksei didn't care about their bold intentions to defend themselves. He dashed straight at them while roaring with a rage that exceeded even that of when the Moksei had battled the vile eater of children. The battle-guised warrior frothed maggots in his fury and showed none of the honorable composure his kind had revealed when fighting with the valiant huntresses. Maggot Feast wielded an ornate club with a grace honed by 100 lethal battles. His first swing shattered the obsidian head on Bjorn's spear. The Norsemen were used to fighting with iron weapons and had no conception of the fragility of more primitive weaponry. Both cousins thrust their spears at the Moksei, but the putrefied warrior defied them by acrobatically springing into the air, then somersaulting over the three men's heads to land back on his feet behind them. Zabu stood within easy reach of the Moksei, but the rotted warrior paid him no mind. Bjorn spun about, then clubbed the creature with the remains of his spear. The Moksai broke the pole against his extended forearm, then kicked Bjorn in the chest to send him flying. The two other Norsemen stabbed with their spears and seemingly buried the points into the monster's torso. They swiftly pulled the weapons back out, and on that instant the undead Moksai completely decomposed. The flesh and guts fell into a pile on the ground, followed immediately by a tumble of loose bones, then finally the skull topped the heap off. Bjorn got back to his feet, then searched about for a new weapon. At a glance he saw that a pack of the warrioresses approached from their village. "Come on," he told his triumphant companions. "Let's get the hell out of here." "No," Zabu squealed in desperation. "It's only a mind trick. Run!" Bjorn's elder cousin gave the small man a smirking expression. "What's his problem?" The Norseman just finished his question before his head exploded in a shower of gore and venting blood. The undead Moksai had reformed in the time of a blink and then kept attacking after he made his first kill with his war club. "I'll take one of you alive," the Moksai snarled, in words no Viking could understand. "We want to know where you come from." Bjorn dove to grab the functional weapon that fell from his slain cousin's hand. The remaining cousin attacked the Moksai with his spear to cover Bjorn during his moment of vulnerability. The Moksai swatted the Norseman's thrust aside with his club, stepped in close, and then grabbed the spear, which he easily snapped in half with the strength of one arm. Before his victim could escape, the Moksai reversed the front half of the spear he held and then jammed the obsidian blade into his enemy's bowels. By the time Bjorn was up and ready with his new weapon, he faced the putrefied Moksai on his own. One of his cousins was already dead, and the other writhed on the ground, mortally injured. Zabu was unharmed, but the small man had no intention of either arming himself or attacking the Moksai, even if he did have the means. The wounded cousin was unable to get up, but he was still willing to fight. "Lure him near me," he called to Bjorn while he retched blood. "I'll try and grab him for you." Bjorn made a hasty lunge at the Moksai with his spear before he dodged aside to put his wounded cousin between himself and the decomposed warrior. Maggot Feast chased after Bjorn, then, just as planned, the wounded Norseman seized onto one of the Moksai's festering legs. A quick and decisive slash from the Moksai's club shattered the wounded man's skull. It was long enough of an opening for Bjorn to put all of his strength and weight behind his spear and then ram it into the Moksai's torso. Though the creature had rotten flesh, it seemed as hard as oak when Bjorn tried to pierce it. Despite the Moksai's resilience, the spear dug in deep to set the undead warrior into an agonized howl. As the Mose tried to pull the spear out of his body, another spear sailed in to strike him solidly in the back. The advancing group of warrioresses who charged forth from their village threw other well-aimed spears at Maggot Feast. The Mose dodged aside, knowing that the host overmatched him with their numbers. As the spears struck into the ground around him, he loped over toward the cliff's edge to escape. "No men exist anywhere that can stand against us," the Moksai shouted defiantly at the women. "No threat to our authority has the strength to survive." As more spears came at him, the Moksai turned away, then leaped from the cliff toward the waterfall. He quickly disappeared amidst the watery spray and the darkness. If he hit the large pool at the base of the cliff, it went unheard. Zabu fell to his knees in genuflection to placate the pack of outraged women. They seethed with battle lust, and he didn't want to provoke them into being violent. "They didn't understand the danger," Zabu pleaded. "They thought you were planning to enslave them. They just wanted to go home." One of the 20 women was the Blood Panther huntress that Bjorn had struck in the mouth and put down. She headed straight for Bjorn, then challenged his spear with her own. The woman intended to have a duel with him using the weapons. "Put down the spear," Zabu told him in Norse. "If you resist, they're going to kill you." He saw that Bjorn was hesitant to submit, so he said more to be convincing. "Your 2 friends are already dead. Isn't that enough for you?" Bjorn gazed over the remains of his cousins, then realized that they had all been foolish to leave the security of the women's village. The women had treated them well enough, especially when he considered that their escape hadn't even taken them out of sight of the community. He knew that his situation was hopeless and that he had to make a choice about his future. Either he would submit to their control or get on with dying by fighting them. Zabu saw that Bjorn was about to kill himself with an act of rebelliousness. "I have seen for myself how womanly you are." He meant his words as a genuine compliment because in his world women were the great warriors. "Surely you are strong enough to take some punishment. It's better to live, so that maybe the day will come when you can avenge your friends. I promise you that Maggot Feast still lives and will return. A Moksai cannot die so easily, and his wounds will soon heal." Bjorn realized from Zabu's tone that he used the term womanly to mean brave and warlike, as were all the women he knew from his village. "Take it then, bitch." Bjorn tossed his spear down at the aggressive woman's feet. His blue eyes burned into her nearly black ones with a hard stare. "We both know that I dropped you once already." He spoke tauntingly. "Consider yourself lucky that I didn't have time to bend you over and teach you a real lesson." Zabu gasped with shock when he heard Bjorn's outrageous comments. He didn't have the nerve or desire to translate the words for the women. The Blood Panther huntress understood well enough from Bjorn's tone, Zabu's reaction, and the intent reflected in Bjorn's eyes. She couldn't withstand his staring, and the longer he maintained his insolence, the more outraged she became. He made it obvious that she didn't intimidate him. Bjorn wasn't even remotely reverential and actually offered a sly smile when he saw how much his attitude galled her. The huntress flung her spear down onto his in a fit of rage before she charged at Bjorn to teach him some better manners. Bjorn just stood impassively as she kicked him in the groin. The pain nearly toppled him over, but she wasn't nearly satisfied with that affliction alone. The huntress continued to kick him while she ranted at him with curses. The other women were unsympathetic to the abuse and even gathered around to watch. When Bjorn went to the ground, he still refused to make a sound. He had no choice other than to cover his head with his arms to lessen the damage. An amused feminine voice came from the darkness nearby to interrupt the scene. "You should know better than to spill so much crimson honey," she said aristocratically in the language of the huntresses. "You know that I have such a sweet tooth." The huntresses forgot Bjorn and abusing him to make an anxious defense against that unexpected caller. They readied their spears as they formed up into a tight circle with Bjorn at their center. The ample moon and starlight that streamed down from the midnight sky illuminated the speaker with austere clarity. 20 paces away was a comely Markland woman of normal proportions. She wore a slight emerald-hued tunic made from a textile of woven cotton and downy feathers. The garment left one shoulder, one breast, and half her abdomen exposed. The skirt barely concealed the tops of her thighs. Golden bracelets adorned the woman's wrists and ankles. More precious jewelry hung around her neck and from her ears. The arrangement of her long hair was a tastefully high formation with golden cords and jade pins that held it in place. A yellow powder decorated her pale Markland skin. The woman possessed no armor, weapons, or impressive size, yet her smirking, self-confident smile alone was enough to intimidate the whole force of huntresses. One of the women shouted threateningly, "Be gone, Talatzola, you whore queen of all Atzaiman harlots! We're not afraid of the likes of you." The blood-drinking demoness laughed musically. "Hear how your voice trembles." She chided whimsically, "To me, that is reverence enough. Leave me the foreign man, and you may flee back to your island unharmed." She waved a warning finger at them with regal panache. "Refuse me, and I shall take this opportunity to teach you better manners concerning what is proper tribute." The huntresses weighed each other's demeanor to ascertain their courage and willingness to fight. Half of them had expressions that conveyed that they were willing to abandon Bjorn to save themselves, while the rest were willing to fight it out. "Take the two who are already dead," one of them offered munificently. "That should be compromise enough." "I don't feed on the dead," Talatzola declined with an exaggerated shake of her head. "Since you knew that already, I can only assume that you're trying to be insulting. Give the man to me, or I'll be forced to take him." The Mountain Heart huntress, who was first to speak, stepped forward to prove her bravado. "Do your worst," she hissed. "Come tomorrow, we'll be scattering your blackened bones." The forest demoness lost her smile, then sneered, "You shall be my first example. I'm no mere moxie, as you shall soon remember." As the demoniac woman took a step forward, the confrontational huntress hurled her spear with all her enhanced Mountain Heart strength. The weapon streaked toward the kill with the speed of an arrow shot from a longbow. Just as the deadly missile was about to strike the Atzaiman in her breast, the extraordinary woman caught the razor-edged spear casually in her fist to stop it cold. No blood flowed from her bare hand, and she didn't even recoil to absorb the inertia of the impact. "Is that the best you can do?" the forest demoness scoffed as she expertly flipped the spear around into a grip that was proper for throwing it back. "Perhaps you need a lesson in how to use this." The Mountain Heart woman stood ready. "I shall not flee like you before the dawn," she replied courageously. "Kill me if you can." Talatzola took the refined pose of an expert with the javelin as she sighted along the shaft of the spear. Before she could throw, yet another unexpected appearance interrupted the scene. Kitsan charged up from the village, and in her company were 4 other chieftesses. The 5 champions took positions between the Atsemen and the other huntresses. "It's good to see you again, Talat Zola." Kitsan saluted her enemy with a wave of her serrated battle club. "You're too close to our village. Leave before I get angry." The demoness retorted, "Angry?" She felt the insult. What care I for the pathetic anger of Kitsan? No matter what transpires here, you lack the power to destroy me. At worst, I'll be sent home to my palace, only to return next evening to exact my revenge. She lowered the spear, then absently tapped its butt against the ground. "I may have to start dropping corpses upriver from your haven to freshen up the water supply." "Take the men and return to the village," Kitsan ordered the other group of lesser-ranked huntresses. "We will deal with this at Zyman alone." With a supernatural malice that charged her voice to an inhuman tone, Talat Zola raged. "No, never once in 1,000 years have I smelled so unique a blood as his. That man shall be mine." She raised her spear, then hurled it at the group of huntresses who protected Bjorn. Her movement was too swift for anyone to have a chance for physical intervention. The bird dance chieftess reached out with her hand to focus her special power onto the flying spear. Her invisible influence forced the missile from its intended course, so that instead of striking one of the huntresses that Talat Zola had aimed it at, the spear sailed up too high, then passed over their heads to disappear into the distance. Kitsan rushed toward Talat Zola, with her war club held high for a powerful strike. The Blood Panther chiefess followed her closely, holding a long spear at the ready. The two had once duelled over Sabu, but in a real battle they were steadfast sisters. The Mountain Heart chiefess held her position to throw one of the many feathered javelins she kept in a sheath across her back. The superhuman strength she used to propel the massive darts was as great as that shown by the forest demoness herself. Talat Zola attempted to twist and sidestep the incoming Mountain Heart javelin, but the actions of another of the chieftesses impeded her escape. An authoritative fighting chieftess cried, "A spirit caller hunts you now at Zyman. It's too late for you to flee our wrath." Invisible powers that she controlled with her focused mind summoned up a writhing mass of roots that burst from the ground to entwine about Talat Zola's ankles and secure her to where she stood. During that moment of impediment, the javelin pierced Talat Zola through the naked side of her torso. The transfixing lance would have been a mortal stroke to any living foe. It didn't cause the forest demoness any noticeable pain or even hamper her vitality. Talat Zola kicked in frustration at the vines that secured her ankles, causing them to completely shred away. Using both hands, she grabbed the javelin that afflicted her, snapped it in half, and then pulled the pieces from her body to fling them away. A second javelin hurled by the Mountain Heart chiefess nearly repeated the circumstance, but Talat Zola avoided harm by catching the missile from the air and so managed to protect her flesh and rearm herself with a single motion. A moment later, Kitsan was close enough to strike with her serrated club. The watchful one chiefess laid a savage blow to the forest demoness's head. The obsidian edges of her elegantly primitive weapon ripped into the Atsemen's face to mutilate one side of Talat Zola's fierce loveliness. Not even the terrible damage was able to disturb Talat Zola's composure. She ignored the injury just as she had made no effort to avoid the attack that caused it. Her response was to turn the javelin she had caught, then thrust its keen point at Kitsan. The agile huntress tried to evade harm, only she could do little in the way of defense during her moment of being committed to strike. Talat Zola impaled Kitsan's right thigh with the javelin, which made the proud huntress cry out in agony. The demoness's face was hideous as she smiled with half of it still in tatters. "The dead cannot die," she boasted, "but you certainly can." With an easy motion, she hoisted on the shaft of the hardwood javelin, then used it to fling Kitsan away as if she was meat on a poker. The lance tore free from the wounded huntress as she soared through the air to crash 5 paces away. "The dead can die," the Blood Panther huntress cried as she attacked with her spear. She stabbed the broad obsidian point into Talat Zola's neck and then pulled it out to thrust it again into the forest demoness's belly. She boasted, "I shall be the end of you." The Atsemen tried to evade the thrusts. The Blood Panther huntress's aggressive skills were too refined to allow any escape. No blood spurted from Talat Zola's amassed wounds, and she showed no sign of caring what else her enemies did to her. She even laughed as though the battle was no more than an amusing diversion. The demoness snubbed her Blood Panther adversary. "You're a weakling, Bakitsa. No tribeswoman could ever kill me." A slashing swing from the captured javelin left a long slice on the Blood Panther chiefess's flesh from one of her shoulders to the opposing lower rib. The woman was brave and strong. The brief instant that the chiefess flinched was long enough for Talat Zola to backhand her in the face. The mighty blow knocked the huntress back through the air in a flip to land badly several paces away on her neck and shoulders. A third javelin whistled in from the hand of the Mountain Heart chiefess. Talat Zola deflected it from the air with a slap from her own javelin. Not hesitating, she next sprang into the air as though capable of flight, then descended like a stooping hawk to kill the fallen Blood Panther huntress. The bird dance chiefess reached out with her signature power once again and managed to catch the Norsemen in mid-flight, then hold her in place. The lower-ranking huntresses had paused in amazement to watch the battle progress. They finally grabbed Bjorn along with the two dead Norsemen, then fled with all speed for their village. A few of them held back as they considered fighting Talat Zola with their chiefesses. They continued on after Kitsan struggled back onto her feet, then waved for them to hurry away. While Talat Zola momentarily hung trapped in the air, battling to regain control of her flight, the spirit caller chiefess removed a thick hide belt from around her abdomen. She held it by one of its weighted ends, spun it overhead to give it momentum, and then threw it at the forest demoness to ensnare her. The spirit caller's gift allowed her to animate the supple weapon so that it moved like a constricting serpent. When the belt struck Talat Zola, it wrapped about her knees, then securely fixed her legs together. Kitsan bled heavily from her wounded leg. She still had the strength to stand and even run a short distance. When she arrived, Kitsan smashed her toothed club across the demoness's abdomen to bury the sharp obsidian blades into Talat Zola's comely flesh. Once it was in place, she ripped the weapon in a lateral soaring motion that opened the Norseman's belly to spill her intestines. Bokitsa regained her footing, even though her jaw had shattered, her chest had a severe laceration, and she shed a great deal of blood. She rushed back into the fray, then rammed her spear into Talat Zola's chest just as another javelin thrown by the Mountain Heart chiefess embedded in the demoniac woman's left breast. Talat Zola convulsed from the wooden shaft that pierced her heart, and as she did so, blood burst from her many wounds like water through the holes of a broken vessel. The bird dance chiefess slammed the helpless forest demoness into the ground, using the complete control she had gained over her adversary's levitation. Kitsan wasted no time in severing the fallen Atsaiman's head with several ruthless blows from her sword-like weapon. Both the Blood Panther chiefess and Kitsan were in serious danger of collapse from loss of blood. The Mountain Heart chiefess sheathed her ready javelin, then helped her two injured comrades to return to the bridge entering their village. So great was the woman's strength, she easily supported them both and nearly carried them. As the bird dance and spirit caller chiefesses prepared to take charge of Talat Zola's inert body with the intentions of seeing it permanently destroyed, a new menace appeared to thwart them. Tens of thousands of jungle bats came flapping toward them in a great dark mass like a cloud of giant locusts. The noise of their combined wings was a nightmarish sound like no other in nature. In only moments they covered Talat Zola with a thick blanket of their own writhing bodies. Many more battered the two chiefesses by ramming them, landing on them, and attacking them in as best a means as their small claws and teeth could allow. The two women had no choice but to flee without their prize rather than become overwhelmed by the countless small predators. The bats did not pursue the women as they hurried away. Most continued to fly in a cyclonic pattern over the dispatched Atsaiman as though they defended her remains. The chiefesses stopped once they were at a safe distance, then turned to watch what transpired from the security of the bridge's interior section. They gasped in grim displeasure as a great winged form glided down from the dark sky to alight beside Talat Zola's hidden corpse. The creature was another forest demon, only different from the first in that it was of male gender and only remotely human in appearance. His hairy black body was naked and muscular, with long arms and even longer fingers that supported vast membranous bat wings. The bats scattered as their immortal demigod gathered up the remains of his mate. The demon gave the women and their village a long stare to show his antipathy. A great nose with twin vertical slits and enormous ears dominated the creature's horrific head. The eyes were black and glistened in the moonlight. "Do not return to our village, Kamats," Kitsan shouted out at the ominous manifestation of evil, "or my clan shall dedicate their days to finding your lair and opening it to the sun." One of the other huntresses was already binding her wounded leg to staunch the heavy bleeding. "Now take your foul mate and be content that she will endure beside you. Take her and go." Kamats answered her in his high, screeching voice. "I go anywhere that night rules the sky. We have ruled these jungles since the fall of your ancient ancestors and haunted them from long before that. Be satisfied with your small victory, but do not tempt my wrath. Their sad fate may become yours." Kamats wrapped his enormous wings about his mate, surrounded himself with a spiraling column of his obedient bats, and then lifted off into the sky to disappear. Bjorn turned to Zabu for an explanation of the unbelievable things he had seen. "What is wrong with this place?" he asked. "What are those things out there?" Before the small man could answer his inquiry, the Mountain Heart chiefess stepped up to Bjorn, grabbed him by the throat, and then lifted him into the air with the strength of one arm. It was doubly amazing in that the woman wasn't even one of the village's most excessively muscled occupants. "Tell him that he must never disobey again," the woman ordered Zabu. "Tell him that he nearly cost us the lives of indispensable fighters. If he ever causes another moment of trouble, I will break his back, and he will have to drag himself along the ground like a crippled snake to get where he is going." Zabu hurriedly translated as she instructed him. He wanted to keep her from hurting Bjorn any more than was necessary for her to get her point across. Bjorn indicated that he understood with the desperate motion of his bulging eyes. The superhumanly powerful woman dropped him rudely to the ground once she was satisfied that Bjorn had clearly received her message. The village's high priestess arrived with a substantial escort of warrioresses. They promptly collected the wounded women, lifted them up, and then accompanied them away. Several of the watchful one women led Bjorn to his sleeping chamber, where they abandoned him unceremoniously. One warrioress remained in the corridor outside his chamber to act as a guard. Bjorn made no further effort to escape, nor did he make plans for doing so in the future. What he had seen of the Moksai and the forest demons convinced him that any such attempt would be suicidal. The deaths of his two cousins compounded his feelings of isolation and depression such that he did nothing more than collapse on his sleeping pallet and remain there, laying impassively.